Okay, welcome to this session about the WebSDK. Today we are going to learn not only how to use the WebSDK, but also why do you want to use it. And then in the second part, we are going to see how the code translates and how the glue code will be used to make our very own controls. Before we get there, let me present myself because I'm the newest member of Xojo. My name is Ricardo Cruz. I've been working with web technologies for more than 20 years. Probably when Xojo was born, I was already playing with Microsoft front page and Dreamweaver and all these kind of nice tools back then, at least. I've been only using Xojo since 2018. Yeah, I've discovered it because I was looking for a I was looking for a way to create desktop applications and trying to avoid playing with JavaScript. Ironically, in March of this year, I've joined the company to start helping with the web framework. Yeah, this is the first time I see my workmates, including Javier, which is from Spain. We met the other day in the hotel. Xojo Web. This is the easiest way to build web applications. I can say this because I've been playing with all of the frameworks that you can probably know, like Ruby on Rails, Django, Drupal, Laravel. And on the front-end side, I've been working with React, Angular, Vue. I've been working professional with all of them. When I discovered Xojo, I really liked it because it's so easy to create more complex applications, like, for example, a real-time chat, where in other solutions, maybe it will be more trickier. You will have to create the WebSocket server and communicate with the front end using, I don't know, Angular or all these new technologies. With Xojo, it's really easy because you will have everything together. We can consider Xojo Web a full stack framework. When you work with Xojo Web, you won't be doing only the front end or the browser side of the application, but also the backend. And the line between both is really blurry. In Xojo Web, you don't think about you're working on the front end or the back end, or you don't even talk about being a full stack developer, like when you're working in other technologies, other web technologies. In the case of Xojo Web, you will delegate all of the business logic to the back end. That means when you press on a button on the browser, it will send a notification to the backend, and the backend is going to decide what to do with that event. And it will update, for example, a label of a web page. The part that I really like more about Xojo Web is you won't be required to build an API between the front end and the back end. It's everything is coming for free with Xojo. It will be included. You will only need to think about the data that you are passing between the backend and the frontend, but you won't have to be thinking about building a whole REST API or something like that. Most of the time, you won't need to be dealing with the WebSDK, except in the case that you need to delegate some responsibility to the browser. When you want to execute code on the browser, this is the case where you will really need to use the WebSDK. Instead of using the WebSDK, what you normally have to do is create custom controls using the containers. For example, you can compose and create new controls, composing, for example, a text field and a label, which we are going to see in a moment. This is a repository that I've downloaded already to demonstrate this. Okay, this is the example where you can create a new control by composing other plain controls. In this case, this is just a web text area and a web label. Whenever you update the text area, you will subscribe to that event and you will implement it. And for example, you can update the label by just updating the amount of characters and showing the limit. And if you are exceeding that limit, you can, for example, change the color of the label to red, only in the case that you are exceeding the limit. The problem with this method is, as you can see, while I'm typing, it's not being updated in real time. It will be sent to the browser. The browser will decide what to do with this new data, and it will be sending the reply to the browser. So it's not really real time. So in this very specific case, you will be forced to use the WebSDK if your requirements for these web applications is telling you that you really need to do it in real time. This is the very same web component, but we are using the Web SDK from scratch, and as you can see, it can be updated in real time. In this case, we are just executing all of the code in the browser, and we are sending, in the background, we are sending the data to the server. If you can live with the latency, that should be fine. You can create a simple component, and you can leave it like that, unless you really need to delegate that responsibility to the browser. In that case, you have the option to get rid of that latency using the Web SDK. So when do you want to use the Web SDK? Whenever you want to reduce the latency, or when, for example, you want to integrate with a third-party library, like, for example, you want to install a charting library, a new one, for example, or we are creating an example for using the Bootstrap dependency that we have in Xojo Web, but using a component that it's not included in the Xojo Web framework, like, for example, the toast notifications. We are going to include an example for that using the Web SDK in the next version of Xojo. Or maybe if you already know some JavaScript and you want to have some fun, you can do it as well. What are you going to need in order to create your first control? You are going to need to learn JavaScript. That's required. but we really recommend to use TypeScript, not only because it will be giving you compiler errors and a lot of help in order to continue working on your application, but it will also autocomplete all of the WebSDK methods that we are providing. Optionally, also CSS, if you want to create a pixel perfect application. Also, there are situations where you might think that you need to resolve something using JavaScript, but CSS is really powerful to create transitions and animations, hovering effects. It's really interesting to learn, but I recommend it also. As I said in the other slide, Xojo will take care of all of the communication layer. You only need to think about the message that you are passing from the front end to the back end and the other way around. This is the control in a nutshell. When you create a control, it will have a default internal state, which translates to Xojo. It's just, you can think about it as a plain object with some properties, some default values on those properties. Our component is going to render the HTML based on that internal state. You can update that internal state at any time. For example, if I have a yellow cone and I pass this JSON saying that I want to have a blue cube instead, we are going to pass a JSON item from the server to the front end, and it will update the internal state. From there, the component is going to be responsible of re-render the HTML to represent the new state. And when I'm talking about state, you can think about properties of a plain class. The same you can do in the other way around. You can create event listeners in JavaScript and send those events back to the backend, to our Xojo code. Xojo provides a lot of methods and events that you can use in order to pass all this data. So instead of learning how to create this HTTP REST API, you will use only these methods. And I will put the code next to this slide so you can map it to some real code. If we want to pass some data and update the state of the control in the front end, we will start by calling update control, which is a method that will be given to you when you extend a class from the WebSDK UI component. So if we go to the same example, but the one that it's using the WebSDK, it has to extend the WebSDK UI control. Whenever we update, for example, this text computed property, we are going to call the update method. This will tell the framework that you really want to update the state of the front end. So eventually, in the class, we will receive a call to the serialize event, where you will be able and you will have the opportunity to fill this JSON item. For example, I'm setting the text, I'm setting the text limit, and the allow exceed limit property. This will be converted to some JSON that we will receive on the front-end side of the application, on the update control. This is how it looks like in code. This is the front-end code. And if we go to the update control method, we will see the constructor and the other part of the file later. We will be receiving the data. Can you see it properly? Or? We will be parsing the JSON, and we will be updating the internal state of the JavaScript control. At the end of the method, we are going to call refresh. Refresh is going to tell, again, the framework that we want to render the application again based on the new state of the control. You should never call render directly. You should call refresh, because internally Xojo will know how to do it in a way that it won't be calling it more than twice if it's not needed. And on the render, while this method looks really big, the only part of the custom code is this one. We're going the same as in the container example. We are going just to update the label, and we are going to add a CSS class depending on if we are exceeding the text limit or not. If we want to pass data back to the backend, we are going to use the triggered server event method from the JavaScript, or TypeScript in this case. In order to create or to render all these control, there are a lot of ways of doing it with JavaScript. We can just write some plain HTML, or we can create, using the JavaScript API, we can create elements, for example, the text area and the span. All these elements can will be giving us some events, the same as in Xojo, that we can subscribe and we can implement those events. So in the constructor, we can, for example, add an event listener for the input event, and from there, we can execute the triggered server event only if, for example, in this case, only if the internal data is changing, to avoid calling it more than needed. The way it works is pretty similar. We will be writing it in JavaScript, but it's pretty similar. We are going to send the event using just the name and a set of parameters. Like, for example, in this case, the new text value. Or, for example, if we are updating the control and we are exceeding the limit, we can also, for example, send a new event called limit exceeded, for example. So we only need to think about the JSON code. So the JSON message. This will be received in our Xojo part of the code in the execute event, where we can do a kind of switch to see if we are seeing a text change event or we are seeing a limit exceeded event. And from there, we can rewrite the event in order to use it in the final example, like here, for example. This is the live code. When we extend a class using the WebSDK UI control, we are receiving also all these events. One of the most important one is the JavaScript class name event, where we will be, well, it's a really huge name. The only thing that we need to do is return the name of the class, and we will be using the namespace and the name of the class that we will be giving in the TypeScript file. You will have to check also the WebSDK document to see why you should then use the Xojo namespace, and you should select your own namespace to avoid any conflict between your controls and any other controls that can be used by your users. Then we have the session JavaScript URLs event. This one is where we will be sending the JavaScript code from the backend to the front end. It can be code from, it can be our very own code, or it could be a URL from a third-party library, like, I don't know, Google Maps or whatever you need. In my example, what I'm using is just a constant that has all of the JavaScript code, and we will see how to compile that and fill it in a second. In the event, what we are going to do is just creating a web file share property that we will be creating it only if it doesn't exist. And then in the data, we are going to fill it with a constant JavaScript data. What is important here is to set the session to nil. Otherwise, the first time a user enters into your website, it will work. But if he refreshes, as the session doesn't match, it won't work. If you set the session to nil, it will be available to everyone. And then you just have to return a set of URLs, including this one or any other required URLs, the same as with CSS. You can also draw the control in the layout in real time using the draw control in layout editor, and it works pretty much like when you are working in a canvas or in the PDF class. You will be just drawing rectangles and text and all that. If you change anything, you won't have to refresh the whole project. It will be updated in real time. Well, we are providing some SDK documents that you can check. And they are included in the extras folder. If you go to the WebSDK, you can check the WebSDK examples, where you can learn more about the extra events that we are not covering in this session, but I don't know, maybe in your particular case can be useful, like setting HTML in the header or receiving a specific request from the browser. You can implement a lot of events, and the documents are included in the extras folder. The only thing you really need to do after seeing this session, if you want to start creating your controls, is doing a lot of practice. For example, this has the repository linked in the PDF, but You can try to enhance it, and you can try to recreate it. And if you get stuck, you can, whenever you need it, you can open a new thread in the forum where we have this really nice community, or you can even send me a direct message, and I will be more than happy to help. Before we get into the questions, I really want to show you also how to compile this TypeScript that I've been working. This example, the TypeScript is coming from the examples folder. In the TypeScript example, you can see a really basic example where, let me open it in WebStorm, where you can see the very basics. And you will receive also the autocomplete file. Inside this file, you will have all the methods that the Xojo SDK is providing to you. For example, if you want to create the parameters JSON item, let me open in my example project. All this is coming from that file. For example, you can set and get and all this. In order to compile it, you have to go to the TypeScript folder and write tsc for TypeScript compiler, and it will generate the corresponding JavaScript file, where you can, for example, copy and paste in the constant that we've seen. When you are working with your own controls, this process is a little bit too much. The other way to easier that process is to, instead of calling tsc, we can call it using the watch argument, and it will be waiting for changes. So for example, if I change any line, and if I delete that file, and I save it, it will detect the change, and it will create the new file, the new compiled file. In Xojo, you can create a new build step to copy the file there. So for example, after building, you can go to the distribution folder, the compiled version, and you can include that file. So whenever you run the application, it will take the file from here. If we go to the JavaScript URLs method, and we use this other way of doing it, instead of creating a new web file instance, we will use it by opening the file that we are including in our build. So whenever we run the application, it will use that file, and you won't have to be copying and pasting from the compiled file into your project. It will just work. But if you are planning to distribute this control, or you want to copy and paste it in another place, we don't care about that error. Whenever we want to distribute that control, it's more easier to share it if you use the constant version. So whenever you are ready to go, you will have to copy your code from the compiled JavaScript file, and you will include it in the constant. So that way you can just copy the control and paste it in another place. Any questions? I have a lot about JavaScript.
The application you're using there, WebStorm,
Yeah.
for the TypeScript, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. You can use, so the question is about, about this application. I'm using a code editor for TypeScript, but you can use, for example, Visual Studio Code, which it really supports very well TypeScript. It has support also for the autocomplete and all this, and it's free to use, and it's open source. WebStorm, I prefer it, but you're not required to use WebStorm or any.
That does the error checking of the code. And
Yeah. With Visual Studio Code, you can do it. Yeah, I don't know. I prefer this one because I'm used to it. But if you want to go for Visual Studio Code, I think most of the framework has been code using Visual Studio Code. Questions? Well, one of the things that I want to really clarify is we don't want to to force you to use the WebSDK. You are provided with it. If you find any limitation that is forcing you to really use this browser technique to avoid the limitation of the latency, for example. The idea is to use Xojo for everything, not JavaScript or TypeScript.
So this is the WebSDK will be the solution for the map with the pointers.
Well, no, we will fix the map issue, and you should be able to use all the markers in the map. In the meantime, you can use the WebSDK for anything you want. Like, for example, creating a custom table or a very specific HTML that your requirements.
So if you were building a control where you were using not only the TypeScript library, but bringing in some other library, something like timecode, to give you active timestamps that say 1 minute ago, 2 minutes ago, would you just include that as another file alongside?
So you mean when you are...
So if you had another job, you wanted to make a control that used an external JavaScript library as well as the control that you put in.
You have to bundle it in a single JavaScript or in this.
So if you bundle it by the copy file, if you use that library in 3 controls, you could use the same one.
Yeah. And if you need more files, you can add them here also in this event.
Right.
More questions? Okay, thank you very much.